r/NoSleep. Posted by u/aLGBTsandwich. My friend didn't follow the rules, now he's missing. Part 1. When I was younger, I lived in the Appalachian Mountains. There weren't many other children in my middle school, maybe about 150. It was called Arrow Junior High, AJH. I'm 47 now and I didn't have many memories of the place until recently. The only reason I remembered was because an old classmate of mine messaged me on Facebook. She asked me if I remembered her old boyfriend, and my then best friend, who had gone missing in the 8th grade. At the time, I didn't remember him. Since her message, I've been piecing together things about my old school. Honestly, I'm confused and creeped out. Please, hear me out. I think I know what happened to my friend. I entered AJH in 6th grade after attending Arrow Elementary School. You would expect a middle school to be different from the elementary school, and it certainly was. I shared all of my 6 classes with the friend I mentioned earlier. For the sake of the story, I'll call him Red. On the first day of 6th grade, we were sitting beside each other in homeroom. The teacher entered the room and immediately began to unroll a poster of rules we had to follow. Like any other school, there were rules like, respect others, do not speak when the teacher is speaking, turn in your homework, etc. What unnerved Red and I, were the rules that followed. I can now remember them clearly. 1. If you see a shadow on the walls as you descend down the stairs when you are alone, close your eyes, knock on the wall, and go back up the stairs. 2. If your back is turned while you are talking to someone and you turn around and they are not there, enter the nearest classroom with at least 2 other humans inside. Do not worry, it is not as it seemed. 3. If you are in the restroom and you hear a teacher's voice tell you to exit the restroom with no other reasoning, hide in a stall. Do not exit until the voice stops. 4. Do not enter a room that does not have a teacher inside. 5. If you are more than 10 minutes late for your first class, hide until the next bell rings. 6. Under no circumstances, may you look outside the windows while inside the building. When I heard the rules, they terrified me. I never liked anything to do with horror or scares. Red thought I was an idiot for being afraid of the rules that were jokes to him. Many times, I would catch him trying to sneak a peek through a window, but I always pulled him away. I myself only experienced the first 2 rules for myself. In 6th and 7th grade I had gone through Rule 2 12 times. Each time, following the rules exactly. The first rule only occurred once in the beginning of 8th grade. The problem was, I forgot to knock on the wall. The next morning, I woke up with scars down my arms. They looked as if I had cut myself, which I'd never done before. My parents saw, and they didn't believe my story. I was sent away to a facility for 3 months. The place only messed me up. The more important story happened in later 8th grade. One day in February, Red was 12 minutes late to homeroom. He hobbled into the classroom with blood dripping from his mouth and a puffy black eye. The teacher called his parents and told them he had gotten into a fight. That evening, he came to me and told me he had seen something chasing him that he couldn't make out. Red wanted to find it and identify it. I begged him not to. Of course, he didn't listen. The next week, he approached me and pointed into an empty classroom. Usually, the teachers shut and locked the doors, but on this day, they forgot. I grabbed onto his arm, but he shook it off. He took 1 step inside and he toppled over in pain. He grabbed his leg that had stepped inside and screamed. Teachers rushed over and took him to the nurse. Then, they locked the door. Red didn't return to school for 2 weeks. He had shattered his leg and was in a walking cast. He came and confided in me what he had seen in the classroom. He told me that in the corner of the room he saw what looked like a 6-foot-tall fetus with eyes gouged out of its head and awful jagged teeth. I could tell he wasn't lying. Red may have been a troublemaker, but he wasn't a liar. I begged him to stop. I cried for him and told him he was my best friend. He told me that I was afraid because I was girl. I punched him that day. That was the day he stopped talking to me. I still didn't want him to die, so I watched his endeavors. Except one day, he limped into class with his hand over his eye. He must have met the creature that called him out of the bathroom, as that was an endeavor I had no desire to watch. He removed his hand and where his eye had been was a bloody pit. The teacher shrieked, carried him away. I assumed his parents wouldn't let Red return. However, they did. I watched as he talked to many people, until one was gone when he turned to them. I ran to a classroom with a teacher inside. I watched through a window to the hallway as Red stood still. Red's body contorted strangely. He ran into the same room as I, with 2 broken arms. After 4 weeks, he was back. Casts on his arms, and fake eye, and all. Against better judgment, that day he looked outside the building, through the only possible way. The vents. He turned around and in a frenzy bumped into everything. In 2 days, we found out he was now blind. Somehow, he returned to school with an assistant to help him. I could tell I could not stop him. He was determined. I should have known I would never be able to stop Red. He wanted to break all of the rules despite all of his previous trials. At this point, Red had to know this wasn't a game. I wonder now if Red had been suicidal. He continued his pursuit despite obvious death staring him in the eyes. Maybe there was something more to it? I'm still not sure. Now it was the beginning of spring in mid-March. I watched from a classroom as he stood at his locker casually talking to his assistant as he felt the braille on the lock. I knew what he was planning, but I wasn't going to stop him. I, as a middle schooler, hated him for disregarding me, so I left him to die. It's no excuse, I know. Listen. By the time fourth period rolled around, I hadn't heard any news about Red. I became curious and tried to ask my teacher why he was absent from class. Before I could raise my arm, an announcement boomed over a loudspeaker that I never knew we had: "We are going into a school-wide lockdown. Teachers of AJH do not allow any students into the hallway at this time." Code creature. Code creature. Our teacher nervously backed her way to the door and locked it and pulled the blinds to the window into the hallway. She sped back to her oak desk and continued teaching, sounding nervous. "What is this?" A classmate stood up and scoffed. She stood up and sprinted to the door and opened the blinds. Within seconds our entire class of 10, including me, was surrounding the window. Curiosity burned inside me and I peeked into the halls. I thought I'd never forget what I'd saw. Emphasis on thought. Until that classmate had reached out me I hadn't remembered this. What I saw was a body bag on the floor with Red's hair sticking out of the zipper. There were 2 people beside him in full hazmat suits and had masks resembling a plague doctor's. They snapped to the side and nodded to something in the corner of the hallway. However, before I could see any more the teacher jumped to her feet and pushed us away from the class door. All I can remember next was a thick fog coming under the door. Next thing I know, I'm at my desk. Weren't we in lockdown? I raised my arm to ask. Our teacher smiled. Her lips said that everything was okay, but her eyes looked dead. Of course not. For a moment, the students around me looked confused, but then they, like I, accepted it. I didn't think about Red or the lockdown the rest of the day. Before we dismissed that day, I walked down the hallway and I went to Red's locker. Except, I didn't know it was Red's. Does that make sense? It was like he was erased from my mind. The locker door was ajar. Without thinking, I opened it fully. It was empty except for a small notepad. I can remember grabbing it before a teacher I didn't know tapped me on my shoulder. He grabbed the book from my hands and opened a tile in the floor. It doesn't make sense now, but he put the notepad in and shut the tile. He patted me on the back and I moved along. My last memory of AJH was thinking, we don't have any male teachers. That was 24 years ago. I've noticed some weird things. The classmate who messaged me, I can't remember her. I can't remember Red ever having a girlfriend. I'm not convinced she ever existed. I'm trying not to sound insane. Also, that man. I'd never met him, and we didn't have any male teachers. What about that fog that creeped under the door? What about the loudspeaker that I'd never heard? I've been talking to wife, and even she thinks I'm going crazy. I know I'm not. I've been doing some research and Red's parents are still alive and they live in the same town as AJH. However, AJH closed 20 years ago. For some reason, they never repurposed or demolished the building. It's miles away from the rest of the town, so no one really goes near it. I've bought a plane ticket and I'm taking an Uber to the airport right now. My wife is on a work trip, so she won't miss me. A few hours ago, I got another Facebook message from the classmate. It says, "Good luck." The Uber is speeding up. It's going faster and faster. The driver's looking back at me with slanted eyes. His expression is hidden behind his mask. "Excuse me?" I raise my voice to him. He keeps his eyes glued to the road. "Excuse me?" His eyes become slits. "Stop." He slams his foot down on the accelerator and we speed around curves over flat country land. "Please, stop," I murmur. I shut my eyes tightly and grip onto my phone. As soon as I open my eyes, the driver looks back at me and tilts his head ever so slightly. The car is slowly decreasing in speed. Soon, we get to a stop. I look up. It's the airport. I go to open the door. It has a child lock on it. "You're going to the Appalachian Mountains?" The driver interrogated me. I lied, awkwardly, "No. I'm going to Florida. To visit family. I miss them. A lot." "No, you aren't." "What?" I ask, stuttering. What do you mean? He chuckles, good luck. He steps out of the car and walks around to my car door. He opens it and spreads out his arms as a gesture showing me the airport. I rush inside to get away from him. Nothing is going to stop me from reaching AJH. If I don't post again by Saturday, I'm dead. I have a feeling if I can find the notepad, I will survive another day. I'm about to board my plane now. I'll wish myself luck.